So, so our speaker today is going to be Bhargavi. Um, so, so Paranjabi. Um, so so hopefully I got that almost right. If not, please correct me. So and she'll be talking about information bottleneck approach to rationale extraction. So 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 she is a so she is a second year PhD student at at the University of Washington. So working with Luke Zettelmeyer and so and also um, Hanana Hajashiri, and so was also a so before that did a master's in the at CMU um, in the um, so, so in the language technologies group, and but and so before they got a BTech from IIT Karagapur. So great. So she's already done a lot of great work, even though only in her second year in her PhD so far. So we're so we're all looking forward to what you have to say. So if you want to take it from here.
Sure. So yeah, I will just briefly again introduce myself. My name is Bhargavi Paranjape. I am a second year PhD student at the University of Washington, advised by Professor Luke Zettelmeyer and Professor Hannah Hajashiji. And today I'm going to be talking to you about a project of mine that I was working on in the first half of this year, and which was then accepted as a full paper in the main track of EMNLP 2020. Towards the end of the talk, I will also talk a little bit about some of the future directions that I want to take this work forward. And so yeah, I can get started. Okay. So I hope the screen is visible.
Yes, we
Yeah,
can see that.
okay. So yeah, this work is titled Information Bottleneck for Controlling Conciseness in Rationale Extraction. This is work with Mandar Joshi, John Tixton, and my advisors at the University of Washington. Okay, so I'll begin by motivating what the research problem is. Now, in the last few years, a large number of state-of-the-art models have been released, and they have achieved near human performance on typical NLP tasks like text classification, question answering. And these are typically large black box models that are pre-trained on a large web crawl corpus, and they are black boxes, so they provide very little explanation for why they are making certain predictions. And it is therefore a very critical problem to solve, the problem of why a model makes a certain prediction, because this has downstream implications typically when these models are deployed in critical areas, such as healthcare or the criminal justice system. And the problem of understanding why these models make predictions the way they do becomes of paramount importance. However, when you look at some of these problems like text classification and question answering, and you provide instances of these problems to humans who are tasked with solving these specific instances, they tend to annotate or highlight almost 25% of the input in most of these data sets as the necessary and sufficient part of the input required for prediction. This is highlighted as green in the examples on the slide. And so humans are able to highlight, or rather explain their prediction by highlighting less than a quarter of the text as important for prediction. And this specific subsequence of the input, highlighted in green here, which is deemed as both necessary and sufficient for prediction, is what we term as a rationale in our work. And I'll go a little bit deeper into what we mean by sufficiency and necessity. So sufficiency refers to the fact that the rationale should be concise. It should contain just enough information that is important for prediction for that particular task. And this is crucial because for some of these tasks like question answering or text classification, the input can be really large. It can be document paragraphs and documents and sometimes multiple documents. And ideally, a rationale that you're providing to a human should be something that they can easily consume and easily understand. And so typically it should be concise. And that is the sufficiency desiderata. Now coming to necessity, necessity is connected to the idea of faithfulness. So what do I mean by faithfulness? Faithfulness means that the rationale, the subsequence of text, which is important for prediction, it should actually be used in the model's prediction. So what I mean by that is, in this specific example here, the model, if the text that is highlighted in green is the rationale, then the model should rely entirely on the rationale to make its prediction and not on the other portion of the input, which is deemed not necessary for prediction. That is the broad idea of faithfulness, and we will throughout the talk I will dig deeper into how we can achieve faithfulness. So
I have a question, Bhargavi, if
sure,
you don't
yeah,
mind.
yeah.
Can you go to the previous slide? So, why do you think, like, for example, so these models are pre-trained on previous knowledge and they may know the answer without even looking at the text. So, like, maybe I know this as a fact because in the pre-training this has been learned, because there is lots of papers around which says like language model can predict, they can do mass modeling, so they can obviously learn some knowledge also along with it. Why do you think the model should definitely look at this? They may use this knowledge to basically answer the fact instead of looking at this thing.
Sure, that's a good question, and it came up multiple times when I was working on this project. I would say there are two answers here. One is that um, I think the challenge of understanding how pre-trained models work, what kind of knowledge they store, and how do we characterize interpretability around pre-trained models is a research problem in itself. And is not addressed in this work. And I actually am highlighting that in the future work section. The other thing is that it's not completely incorrect to disregard the input here, because a lot of the times pre-trained models don't work in the zero shot fashion. Like they don't work out of the box for a new task. You have to fine tune them on the data for that task. So the input is important, and the input is also important in the context of the end users interest in this in interpretability, because typically you would employ a technique like this on let's say data from medical corpus, and the stakeholder there can only look and interpret the medical input data and not the pre-training corpus that is available or that is being used to pre-train the model. So to the stakeholder, it's important to relate the prediction back to the input that they understand, which in this case could be the domain text.
Okay, so are you saying that we prefer for as a user of the model or as a data scientist, I prefer that the model give things which are seen to me rather than hidden in the parameters of the model by pre-training. So it's better, we prefer this thing, maybe it's happening,
Right.
because currently we cannot say what is language model learning. So it's better
Exactly, yeah.
it's use the existing input to make
Right.
prediction.
So
Okay.
while ensuring that we are not lying to the end user, we can still just provide what is visible rather than making speculations about millions of parameters and what is being stored in those parameters. That's an entirely different like research problem that is worth pursuing going
Okay.
forward.
Thanks. Go ahead.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, this is the research challenge that we want to solve in this work, where we want to extract a subsequence of the input and called the rationale. And the two important properties that the rationale should satisfy is that it should be concise and it should be faithful to the model's prediction. And a quick outline of the talk is I will go through the approach that we take to achieve this research goal using the information bottleneck principle, and then talk you through the details of model architecture and our experiments and results.
By concise, you mean minimal?
Yeah, minimal is another like maybe another. It's synonymous with what I mean by concise.
Okay. Thank
So let me start by explaining how faithfulness can be achieved by is being achieved in our model. So faithfulness, to reiterate, is where the model has to use only the rationale and not the other part of the input to make its prediction. And the way we achieve this is by breaking our model down into two components, the explainer and the predictor. The explainer's job is to identify the part of the input that is important for prediction. So, in other words, predicting what the rationale should be. And then the predictor's role is to use only the explainer's output, only what the explainer provides as input, and to basically solve the task, that is to predict whatever task label. If it's a question answering task, to generate the answer. If it's a text classification task, to generate the specific class label. So basically the predictor only gets to see what the explainer outputs. So the rationale is faithful to the predictor. It is a statement that we can make if our model is designed in this way.
I have a question. So while training also, do you have this pipeline, or while training you want to say, okay, model can look everything? Or
No, I think I'll go through when I explain the model
okay.
architecture that we follow this definition for training and prediction
Okay.
in order to ensure a strict guarantee of faithfulness.
Okay. Sorry for jumping in.
No issues. So now the problem is that since the predictor only gets to see the explainer's output, and one other detail that I missed out is that typically we work in the setting where we don't know what the rationale is. So the only supervision available is the supervision for the end task, or the answer or the classification label. So the explainer is not being explicitly supervised, and the predictor only gets to see the explainer's output. So if the explainer makes a mistake, then these mistakes get compounded and the predictor can also go wrong. And that's why typically these models that are um, very restrictive and faithful tend to underperform on the task because the errors compound and add up. And that is precisely the trade-off that has to be managed between accuracy of the task and conciseness of the rationale. Specifically, I think what in this also addresses what Vivek was pointing to right now, which is if the predictor gets to see the entire input, then it is less likely to make mistakes than if it only gets to see a part of the input, especially if the explainer has got that part of the input wrong. So there is this trade-off between task accuracy and conciseness of the rationale that the system provides. So what we aim to do is to find a minimally compressed version of the input, or should I say optimally compressed representation of the input, which contains just enough information to predict the task label and forgets other irrelevant information in the input text. That's the overall objective that we want to optimize for. And this happens to be the exact objective of the information bottleneck principle. Information bottleneck principle is an optimization principle used in information theory and in signal processing. It was introduced by Professor Naftali Tishby in 1990, and it's basically a principle that is used to find the optimal trade-off between accuracy and compression. And this relates back to our goal as well. And in a nutshell, what information bottleneck means is that if there is a random variable x which predicts y, for instance, a paragraph of text and a label like the sentiment of that text, IB, information bottleneck for short, is helps find a compressed representation of x, which is termed as the bottleneck variable z, which can best predict y. So in this diagram here, I represent the bottleneck variable z in purple here. And to dig a little bit deeper into what this objective actually is, the objective aims to find an intermediate bottleneck representation z, which is minimally informative about the input x and maximally informative about the output y. So it contains no irrelevant information about x, and it only contains relevant information needed to predict y. So the first term is the compression term or the conciseness term, where it's trying to minimize the mutual information between x and z. And doing so means that z is minimally informative about the input x. The second term in the objective is the accuracy term, where it tries to maximize the mutual information between z and the output y. So this relates to the accuracy because the better the mutual information, or the greater the mutual information between x and y, the more accurate x is in predicting y because it contains more information about y. And both these two terms are, there is a trade-off between these two terms, which is managed by a hyperparameter beta. I hope this introduction to the objective is clear.
I have a question. Why you did like I like for predicting? For example, the first time I got you want the mutual information to be much more like the z should contain as much as information as possible with respect to x, but it should be minimal also. The second term, I was thinking like, why did you put as a joint information term rather than just as a prediction kind of thing? Like, y given x given z. Like first get the z and then you say y given z. What is the probability kind of
Right.
thing? Why did you put
So
as an information term only? Like,
yeah.
I'm trying to understand like why did you come up with this kind of objective rather
Yeah.
than like something different?
So this objective is not our contribution. Like this was how Professor Tishby had formalized information bottleneck, because this is introduced in information theory and they talk about minimal statistics and they deal with probability distributions. So they are able to characterize this using mutual information. But as you said, the second term is like a cross, it could be framed as a cross entropy term, like how to best predict conditional probability of predicting y given z. And you'll see that when we actually use this objective, that second term actually becomes what you're saying, yeah, in the cross entropy term. Okay, um, so this is the next part that I'm going to talk about. Basically, is going towards what Vivek was mentioning, which is you cannot actually optimize this objective because we deal with inputs like text, which are represented in high dimensional space, and it's hard to compute mutual information in a tractable closed form manner between these two, between two variables that are represented in high dimensional space. So as a result, there is recent work that has established a variational lower bound on this objective in a way that both the terms of the objective are now characterized by neural networks, and you can actually use this objective in a model that is trained using stochastic gradient descent. The details of this paper of the exact derivation of the lower bound are quite extensive and are not our main contribution. So I can direct you to the paper that introduced the variational lower bound. But what I would want to do is talk to you about how those two terms get translated into actual loss terms that can be optimized for. So the first term, which is the accuracy term, which is how best can Z predict Y, that becomes a a term that very much resembles like a standard cross entropy term where you want to maximize the conditional probability of predicting y given z. And this is typically the accuracy term, but it's more often referred to as the task loss. How good is the model at predicting the right task label? And then the second term, which is getting rid of information about X in Z, the compression term, this term is, it amounts to the KL divergence between two probability distributions. The posterior probability distribution of Z, P of Z, which is dependent on X, so it's P of Z given X, and the prior probability distribution of Z, which is independent of X. So two things to be made clear here is that in this objective, two quantities are learnable. The conditional distribution of y given z, q, that is parameterized, and the posterior probability of z given x, which is p, that is also parameterized. And what is important here is why is this particular KL term, why is it corresponding to the reduction of mutual information between X and Z? That is because you're trying to learn a distribution P which is dependent on X, but you're also trying to bring it closer to a distribution which is independent of X. So since R of Z contains, it's a prior, it has no information about X, and you want your posterior, the P distribution that you learn, you want it to be as close to an uninformative prior. And that corresponds to how you're basically getting rid of information about X in the variable Z. I hope that is clear. Sorry.
So the second term, what is the objective? You want the Z to be has away from X. Is that right? Like you wanted to
Yeah,
have it
like,
much away from X, but it should be able to predict the Y.
Yeah.
Because
So
of the
the
first.
predict the y term comes from the first term, which is
Yeah.
like a cross entropy term, and the second term is get rid of information about X. And the way that they do that, so that you can actually do it in a tractable manner with SGD, is they are trying to minimize the distance between the two distributions. One of the distributions, which we learn, P, it depends on X. The other one is a prior, which is independent of X. So if you try to bring the learnable distribution to closer to the distribution which contains no information about X, you are actually getting rid of information about X in the distribution of Z.
Okay. But the second term, it may possible that the model start learning what it has learned and maybe getting rid of useful information also. Anyway, that's
yes, that's true. Yeah. So that is the trade-off that has to be managed, because if you set beta to be too high, too low in this case, then where divergence term too much, then you will end up losing information about y as well.
okay. And did you put any
Am I?
Yeah. It was a little break, but I got it. So
Yeah.
did you put any constraints also, like there should be some at least information taken out from X or something like that? Is there any constraints also, like Z should not be null, for example, or Z should be part of X, or Z something like that? Is it?
So one obvious way of controlling how much information to get rid of from X is through the hyperparameter beta.
Oh, beta. Okay.
But then there are other complexities, like how are X and Z represented, and that, like, I will get to it later, and maybe there are more optimal ways of doing it which we may not have addressed in our paper right now.
Okay, thanks. Continue.
Yeah. So this, up until now, this is work where I've just introduced what was done in prior to our work, where the information bottleneck principle was converted into a objective that can be optimized for using gradient descent. But now I come to the issue of why we are using information bottleneck. So we are using information bottleneck to extract a sufficient and necessary rationale. So for us, the intermediate bottleneck variable Z, that is the rationale. Like that, in our use case, that is the proxy for the rationale. And therefore, the Z that we obtain during optimization should be a subsequence of the input. As mentioned earlier, it should be a few, let's say if there are 10 sentences, it should be the first and the third sentence. So that should be Z. It should be human readable and a subsequence of the input, which is a constraint that we have to enforce in our use case of information bottleneck. And an illustrative figure of what I mean is presented here, where we want the bottleneck representation Z to be a subsequence of the input text. And therefore, we have to introduce a new formulation for, or a modified formulation for information bottleneck. It's what we term the interpretable formulation for information bottleneck, where the intermediate bottleneck variable Z has to be interpretable. And the way we do that is by introducing a third variable termed as the mask. The mask is a binary valued vector, which has the same size as the input sequence. And the input sequence is typically a sequence of words or sentences. And Z, which is the bottleneck variable, is obtained by using the mask over the input, as shown in this figure. So the mask variable leaves, since it's a binary mask 0, 1, it entirely blocks out the sentences where the mask is 0 and only lets through the sentences where the mask is 1. And this ensures that what you get out of the bottleneck Z is still human readable and it's still interpretable, which is like a it's a modified version of the information bottleneck objective introduced earlier. And for our use case, the objective is almost identical to the objective used before, but the significant difference is that now we are minimizing the Hare divergence between the posterior and prior probabilities of the mask, not Z, but the mask. So basically reducing the Hare divergence between the probability of the mask given the input and a prior probability R over the mask, which contains no information about the input. And the details of how this derivation, we arrive at this derivation, are mentioned more explicitly in the paper, and I welcome you to check that out in the appendix of the paper. So now the last remaining crucial detail is how do we set the prior? So this prior over the mask is basically having no information about what the input is. What do we know about the mask? And we do know that the mask has to be sparse, because a lot of the human annotations for rationales, people tend to annotate, as I mentioned, less than 25% of the input. So a good value for the mask could be set based on the expected amount of sparsity in the mask for a specific data set. For instance, in this table here, I have, for the different data sets that we experiment with, the percentage of the input that is marked as a rationale by the human. And that's a good estimate for how sparse this mask should be. So we could set the prior R of M to be, let's say for fever, the value is 20%. So 0.2 could be the mask value. I'm not sure if I'm reading that correctly here, but okay. On the other hand, it could also be set based on the desired amount of sparsity that you want. So if you want to extract a rationale which is 30% of the input, then a good estimate for the mask could be 0.3. So in our experiments, we don't experiment with a dynamic mask, where a dynamic value for the prior. We set the prior value of the mask to a constant probability value pi, which is typically between 0 and 0.25. Because for most of our data sets, the rationale length is typically less than a quarter of the input length. And this is the best prior estimate of the mask that we know beforehand, before seeing the input. So the overall objective that we optimize is mentioned here and highlighted, where now we are minimizing the KL divergence between the probability, the posterior probability of predicting the mass given the input, and a constant value pi. That's the compression term. And the accuracy term is still the cross entropy term between, or rather the conditional probability of predicting y given z, except that z now is mask times input. So I hope this objective is clear.
So the mask is learned and it's initialized randomly with sparsity, the given sparsity.
So the mask is learned based on, it's learned using the distribution P. So P is initialized as a neural network, and the output that you get is in sigmoid form. And that's the predicted mask. Initialization is, there are two initializations. One is the initialization given to the neural network itself, which is random, or it could be a pre-trained model. And the other initialization is to the prior, which is fixed. It's pi is not a learnable parameter. It's fixed based on the length, the prior length for that specific data set, or whatever desired length you want to set that parameter to, the hyperparameter pi to. So there are basically two parameters in the optimization, beta and pi.
Okay.
So now I'll dig into the model architecture. So our model, we initialize both the explainer and the predictor or the classifier using BERT-based transformers, but ideally any encoder over sentences could be used here. We experiment with BERT-based. And note that the explainer and the classifier or the predictor exactly correspond to the two terms in our objective. The term on the left, which is the probability of predicting y given the bottleneck representation, that corresponds to the classifier model. So Q is the neural network that we initialize the classifier with, and the compression term, which is the probability, the posterior probability of predicting the mass given the input, that corresponds to our explainer, and therefore the P, the probability that is being estimated, the posterior probability, that is initialized as a BERT-based model. So how does this work? So I'll start by talking about the explainer first. So we have X, which is a sequence of sentences, and the explainer model basically predicts a set of probability values where each probability value represents the likelihood of that sentence being part of the rationale. And we do that by using BERT to encode all the sentences, keeping note of the sentence boundaries, and then for each sentence, we concatenate the start and end contextualized representation, and then pass it through another layer to get a single probability value. So for X1, that is 0.6. Next, what we do is we need to be able to obtain a mask, which is a binary valued mask from these probability values. And we do so by sampling using Bernoulli distributions. So like in this case, the probability of predicting the first sentence is 0.6. So with probability 0.6, we could sample a 1, and with probability 0.4, you could sample a 0. Now the catch here is that once we start sampling from a distribution, it's hard to differentiate through this sampling operation. And to resolve this, we use the standard trick in latent variable modeling or variational autoencoders, where the binary valued vector M is made differentiable by transforming each of these values into a softmax. It's termed as the Gumbel softmax value. The idea here basically is, instead of actually drawing 0, 1 samples, we draw samples that are real valued where the values corresponding to 0 are not exactly 0, but they are very close to 0. And the values that correspond to 1 are not exactly 1, but they are very close to 1. What this allows us to do basically is to at least pass gradients through all the way through to the parameters of the explainer. And then finally, the classifier basically only sees the unmasked sentences. So the mask that is sampled is applied to a new set of representations of the input, and only the ones that are unmasked survive this operation and are used to predict the label. So I hope that the model architecture is clear.
So the
So
Gumbel softmax is used to basically make instead of having binary, you want to have something more close to binary, but not exact binary, so that the gradient can flow.
yeah,
Okay.
that's the basic idea. And it's not a novel. Like, this is used in most variational autoencoder and or any formulation where there is a sampling operation and you are drawing discrete values like 0 and 1. This is relaxed by, instead of drawing 0 and 1 hard binary values, they draw values that are very close to 0 or 1.
Interesting. Okay.
So I'll now turn to the experiment section. So we experimented on a recently introduced benchmark task for interpretability called the eraser benchmark. This is a recent paper by folks at Northeastern and Salesforce. So they basically introduce or they collate data sets from multiple sources, uh, encompassing question answering, text classification, fact verification. And for each of these data sets, they also have humans annotate what part of the input is important for prediction. So they have humans annotate the rationales at the sentence level. So they help, the human is basically provided the entire input, and the human has to identify the sentences that are important for prediction. So we experiment with all of the 5 major data sets in that benchmark. Movies, which is a sentiment analysis task. Fever data set, which is a fact verification task. So basically an input, and you are given a fact, and you have to verify whether the fact is true or false given the input context. And then we have evidence inferences, again, a similar fact verification task, although it's on a scientific text corpus. And then there are question answering tasks. BoolQ is a Boolean QA task. So the task is given an input context and a question, which is typically a yes/no question. The task is to predict whether the answer is yes or no. And with multi-RC, it's a reading comprehension task where, given a context and a question, you have 4 options and you have to choose one of the options to be correct. Again, all these data sets are specifically annotated for rationales and the sentence level.
I have a question, like just a thought. I feel like from the model, it look like you are somewhat doing something like an extractive summarization of the text and then trying to do the task over it. So have you thought of something around that? Like, because it look like you are somewhat want to preserve the most important information,
Right.
but conditioned on the label Y. That's also a new factor which I feel depending on the task. But somehow you are extracting information and then doing the task over it somewhat. And this you are doing in a joint kind of way. Something like
Yes. Yeah, I think the difference would be that in an extractive summarization task, it's not anchored on any specific label or end objective.
yeah.
Like, the objective is like extract the most important sentences in the input, and typically there is no way to quantify what importance means. But here there is this notion of extract what is required to predict the sentiment of the paragraph, or extract what is required to answer a question, or extract what is required to verify a fact. So it's extractive summarization, but it's anchored on a specific objective, which is the Y label in the optimization.
Okay. Did you put a baseline around this, like extractive summarization, then followed by some the task, something like? I just curious.
Um,
It will be a good baseline kind of thing, I feel, to
yeah,
put
I
out that
think,
why is important in some, like putting the information cut through.
yeah. I think I'm struggling to understand what would happen if Y is not in the picture at all. Then it's not entirely information bottleneck anymore.
Yeah,
Like,
I got the one.
but yeah, and I have also thought about whether this information bottleneck principle could be used for summarization.
Yeah.
And it's possible to design proxy anchors for Y. So in summarization, we don't know what Y is. And there are works that have used information bottleneck for summarization. But what they do is they say, okay, extract a summary from the input text, which can best predict what the next paragraph should be. So that way you are only retaining enough information that is required to
Mhm.
to know what the next paragraph is. So it leaves out the details of the paragraph that are not very important. And that could be a proxy Y. And people have explored that angle for summarization.
Interesting. Okay, continue. Thanks.
Yeah, so the metrics we evaluate on are primarily the task metric, which is, since most of these tasks reduce to text classification tasks, it's F1, and and then the additional metric is to verify the quality of the rationales, and we do that by again employing token level F1, but the F1 is now computed between the rationales that are predicted by our model and the gold annotations that are provided by humans for the eraser tasks. So baselines, we investigate baselines which are constrained in a manner similar to ours. So again, there is no supervision available for the rationale, and the only knowledge of what the rationale should look like is that it should be concise or small. And one of the obvious baselines that comes into picture is, why not just make the mask sparse? And you could do that by just making the norm of the mask as small as possible, which is a good baseline to start off with, and it's the one that we experiment with. So in this baseline, basically the task loss, which is how well is the model doing in predicting Y, that remains the same. But the information loss, where we were minimizing KL divergence, instead of that, we just minimize the norm of the mask vector. So this minimizes the number of ones in the mask. And additionally, to be fair to the baseline, we make sure that the mask value should not be lower than a fixed value pi. And this pi is very analogous to the prior probability in our model. In our model, we were making sure that our probability values uh, don't sway too much away from the value pi. In this case, in this baseline, basically we ensure that the value of the norm is not further away from the value pi. And then the pi is basically set based on what we know about the data set in both cases, both in our objective as well as this baseline. And then we also experiment with another baseline where we get rid of any kind of information or norm loss. So we basically get rid of any prior information about the mask. So if we did not know that the mask was sparse, we would only have the first term where we are optimizing for how good is the model at predicting the label. And that's the objective, where only the first term is retained. That's the other baseline that we have. So I turn to results. So this table so this graph is indicating the performance on the final task for all of the 5 data sets. And I'll take you through some emerging patterns. So firstly, there is, if the last baseline I mentioned, where only the task loss is being optimized and there is no information loss or no loss over the mask at all, that significantly underperforms across all the data sets. And one of the reasons that that could happen is the knowledge that the mask should be sparse is a good prior, and it helps in the optimization of the model. Uh, and not having that prior during optimization can hurt the model's task performance, simply because it is not being optimized to predict a small or a concise rationale. Um, on the other hand, when we compare our approach, which is termed the sparse IB approach, with the baseline where we only make the mask sparse, we observe that across all the data sets, our model is slightly overperforms over the baseline that I talked about. And specifically, the differences are observable and more significant when we look at the rationale metric, the rationale, how good the rationale is. And so digging deeper into why that happens, we basically do a bunch of ablations. And in this case, what we do is we change the value of pi, which is changing how sparse the mask should be. And the tables on the left basically indicate that. So the one on the top is the task performance. And this pattern clearly indicates that the less sparse the mask is, in other words, the more sentences you let through the bottleneck, the task performance is going to improve, which is still an indication that we are not managing this trade-off the best way we can. Ideally, task performance should start to plateau once you have got all of the sentences that are needed. But since all these models still tend to make errors, in the best case, when you see all of the input, that's when the task performance peaks. But this happens both for our baseline, for the baseline as well as our model, and our model has an edge over the baseline across the values of pi. And then the second graph below is basically the pattern of rationale F1. And here you can see that rationale F1 basically peaks at a small value for pi, not very small, but not very large either. And that's because that is the optimal length where it basically has the best precision recall trade-off. So it's not too long that it has high recall, low precision, but it's not too short that it's not precise enough. It's not getting all of the sentences needed. So the rationale F1 typically tends to peak at a small value for pi. And then again, we observe that our model is performing or has an edge over the baseline model. And all these experiments are done over multiple random runs of the model, of both models.
Can you explain what is rational F1? What do you mean by rational in that sense? Like what you are trying to measure? What is this metric basically telling us about?
So rationale F1 is basically measuring the quality of the rationales that you generate. I don't have a figure here. Yeah. So this, the part that remains in the bottleneck after applying the mask, that's the rationale. And we want to know if, since we have annotations for what are the sentences that should go through the bottleneck, we can do an F1 comparison between what the model lets through the bottleneck and what a human chooses to let through the bottleneck.
Oh, okay.
So that's basically measuring how good is the quality of the explanation or the rationale that the model is providing.
How good is the mask in some way?
Yeah, how good is the mask compared to the gold mask? And that's why it peaks at a value somewhere in between 0 and 0.5.
I have this
Because it's,
question. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
oh no, I think I completed my thought.
Yeah, I was thinking like, why do you think like having the full no mask is doing better than having some mask? I agree, like the mask can be large, but like the other should be other information which are not related for the task or something. Why it's like that important in prediction somehow? Like, why is the model thing having good performance in that? Like, have you ever thought of like any thought on this? Like,
Do you mean that why is it that in the top graph when
Yeah.
we let through all the input, that I
Yeah.
think that is just an indication of the fact that our models are not 100% accurate
It
at
basically,
predicting the mask.
it
So
basically
whenever
saying
it
if,
make
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
so
Continue.
what is happening is that there are instances where it's making a mistake, both our model and the baseline. And when it makes a mistake, whatever it lets through the bottleneck is incorrect, and the predictor gets it wrong, and it performs worse on the task. In some sense, this graph is indicating that this problem is not yet solved, the problem of this paper. Because ideally what should happen is, once you start getting really good at predicting the rationale, the task performance should plateau.
Yeah.
I don't know if my cursor is moving, but at the point where the rational F1 plateaus, at the point at which the rational F1 peaks, at that point the task F1 should plateau, and it should no longer increase after that if we are doing a good job at predicting the rationale.
Yeah.
But all models are making mistakes to some
Plateau, or I
extent.
don't know, bell curve maybe, because the other information can act as a noise also.
That's also possible. It can hurt task performance
Yeah,
as
but
well.
it look like it's just increasing. Like, give it any sentence attached to it, and it's helping somewhat. Related
Yeah,
sentence, obviously, but
that's
interesting.
true. Yeah. And there might be more uh, like degenerate things happening as well. Like it's possible that there is, because these representations are contextualized in our
Hmm.
model, there is some leakage of information between like a neighboring sentence and the
I
current
I
sentence,
I
at least
also
in
feel
the,
that.
yeah, not in the, so this question often comes up when I talk about this work. So it's, the leakage might be happening when the explainer is predicting probabilities over the sentences, but the leakage doesn't happen in the classifier or the task model, because there the sentences that have 0 as the mask are completely blocked.
Hmm.
But yeah, there is still some amount of information leaking, and um, it's hard to control for that without losing task performance. Like these contextualized BERT representations are what give the task performance that high value. So if we were to just use glove embeddings, then we could prevent the leakage, but it just doesn't perform as well.
Hmm.
Um, so the other interesting analysis is that why is this? Why is it that we are our model, which is using information bottleneck and minimizing KL divergence between the posterior and prior, why is it doing better than a very simple baseline that just minimizes the norm of the mask? So digging deeper into that question, what we did is we investigated what is the average length of the mask uh, across examples achieved by our model and the baseline, and what is the variance across examples for both our model and the baseline. And what we observe is, the first thing is that our model is able to achieve an average mask length or average proportion of rational, sorry, rational over the input. That average length is very similar to the prior that we set, the pi value that we set in our objective. On the other hand, the um, baseline approach is not able to achieve that exact amount of sparsity on an average. It generally tends to be less or more sparse, which is one indication of why the task performance might be poorer for the baseline. The other interesting thing is the variance, which is higher for our model compared to the baseline. And this means that our model is able to achieve the desired sparsity in expectation, while at the same time being able to adopt to different examples. For some examples, the mask could be larger because in that example, it's possible that you need more of the input for prediction. And in some examples, you need less of the input. And our model is able to achieve that trade-off between the heavy and light examples, while still on an average achieving the desired, like the prior value of the mask that we set during optimization. And yeah, I hope that is clear. There are some interesting things here that I noticed where it relates to the gradient for our model and the baseline. If we compute the gradient of KL, the KL term, it depends on the mask value, whereas the gradient of the norm of any vector is just 1 or 0. And so that relates to why the variance is higher for our model and why, as a result, it's performing better.
Interesting.
Right. So this is again coming back to the question Vivek was asking, which is even after the improvements that we get over the baseline, our model is still not able to beat the model that sees the entire input, which is the full input model. And that's probably because it's not doing a 100% job at identifying the correct rationale. So what could we do to like bridge the gap between a explainable or a model that generates an explanation and a model that uses the entire input but provides no explanation? And one way we could do remedy this is by using some amount of human supervision for what the rationale should be. In our previous setting, the only supervision was for the task and not for the intermediate input, in the intermediate rationale. So we consider a more relaxed setting, a semi-supervised setting where now we assume that we know what the gold mask is. So in that case, we don't have to minimize KL divergence or make the mask sparse. We just have to minimize the cross entropy between the gold mask and the predicted mask. So the second term now is also a supervised loss term, the rational loss. And we can do that because the data sets that we annotate, that we experiment with, have annotations for what the actual mask or what the actual rationale should be, which is a huge ask because typically in the wild we may not have these annotations. But what happens as a result of these experiments is that for most of the data sets we experiment with less than 50% of the examples annotated for rationales, we are able to close that gap between the unsupervised model and the, or rather close the gap between our model, which generates the explanation, and a model that cannot and just uses the entire input. So you can see in these graphs, specifically the multi-RC graph, how it is able to, with very little training data, get to the full input performance. And the other interesting observation, which I think is good for practitioners to know, is that the benefits are diminishing after 25% or in some cases 50% of the data. So you don't have to annotate the entire data for rationales because with even less than 50% of the data annotated for rationales, you're able to bridge the gap between an explainable model and a full model. And there are diminishing returns after that.
This may be due to similar examples in the data sets.
That's quite likely. And it's possible to employ some active learning here to identify what examples we want annotations for.
Diversity in annotations, yes.
Here are a few errors that the model was making. And typically it's a bit surprising to me, which is why I think there is a lot of more work to be done here, that it still tends to rely on certain spurious correlations and surface level features. Like a good example of this is the second example where this is a fact verification task, and the fact that has to be supported or refuted is unforced labor is a reason for human trafficking. And this is a refute example because the word that occurs in the context is forced. But it seems to me that the model seems to be making this shallow association between unforced and forced. And this could be remedied by having better representations for sentences in the input. Like in my case, the input representation is just putting everything through BERT and then through a transformer model and then only getting the start and end token representations and joining them up. And that may not be the best way to represent a long sentence. So it's still making these errors where it can't learn that unforced and forced are antonyms of each other. Similarly, it sometimes makes pipe errors, like in the third example where Atlanta metropolitan area is located in South Georgia. That's not entirely true because it's Florida, and the type is still the same, Georgia, Florida, but it's not an exact match. Yet the model makes this mistake and identifies the last sentence as the label, as the rationale. So on the whole, I think it's worth investigating what the representations should be for these sentences. Yeah. So in conclusion, we study the problem of extracting a faithful and interpretable rationale, which is both very accurate for the task, but at the same time very concise. And we manage this trade-off using information bottleneck. And our experiments indicate that over simple baselines, we are able to achieve improvements in the task and rationale metrics, and we are able to ascertain why that is happening. And we also observe that in the semi-supervised setting where we employ supervision for the rationales, we are able to bridge the gap between an interpretable model and a model that uses the entire input. So I wouldn't go too much into future directions here, but I wanted to just highlight a few emerging directions. One of them, I think, was what Vivek mentioned as his first question, which is you cannot ignore the problem that we are actually working with pre-trained models. So the knowledge that is contained in this model is not just what it sees in the input, but what it has been pre-trained on. And a good example of this is the Winograd schema challenge. So Winograd schema challenge is where you're given a sentence and, for instance, I picked up a bag of peanuts and raisins for a snack. I wanted something sweet, so I stored the dash for now. And the dash here is a human will fill that dash out with peanuts. And the reasoning would be that, so peanuts are not sweet, raisins are, and if you want something sweet right now, then you would store something salty for later. And all of this information is not in the input. And it turns out that pre-trained models are doing really well on this task, but we have no idea why. And we have no idea whether they are using information beyond the input. And that's a research problem that I am working on right now. And it's a challenging problem. The other new direction in this area is the concept of counterfactual explanations. So in counterfactual explanations, this is an example from Matt Gardner's paper in EI2. They brought up this idea of counterfactual explanations. The idea is that a human could minimally change the input in certain ways so that the label switches. So for instance, in this case, there's a paragraph with a negative sentiment, and a human changed some of the words as indicated in blue, and as a result, the label shifted. And the idea is these sort of explanations they test faithfulness in that the model should be able to deal with all kinds of inputs. So if it's trained on the input on the left, then even making minimal edits of the input, it should still predict the other label or the positive label for if given the input which is on the right. It turns out that most of these models cannot. They predict a negative sentiment for both the left and the right side example. And that again exposes some of the biases and spurious correlations that the model could be making, which is again an interesting area to look at. And then lastly, working more on the problem of applying information bottleneck itself. One outstanding challenge is that in our formulation, we are constrained to have Z as an interpretable, human readable variable. And that may not be the most optimal compression. If we did not have that constraint, Z could be like a d-dimensional vector. It wouldn't be interpretable, but it might be the best compression of the input in order to get the best accuracy. And somewhere these two ideas have to converge. The bottleneck variable Z should be optimal, like it should be the best possible compression you can get. At the same time, it should be human readable. And our work is maybe just a preliminary attempt at addressing both these things, or rather we have only addressed the fact that Z should be interpretable, but there is the challenge of Z should be an optimal compression, which is why we have these anomalies where we still need the entire input to get the best performance of the model, because the model is not doing a good job at the compression yet. So there might be more work in getting that information bottleneck objective to work better, not just be interpretable, but also be very optimal in the compression. Yeah, that's all I had for you guys.
Thanks for the talk. We can have our virtual clap. Just we have time.
So thanks a lot for the great talk. So I know Vivek was asking a lot of questions during the talk, but if there are any other questions now from the audience.
Are there only 5 minutes or?
Yeah. So I have one question, and so I think you partially addressed it, but I didn't quite get all of this. So it seems like your mask is mainly blocking on the level of sentences, right? So there are occasionally going to be some kind of concepts which drift across sentences, and I know this is challenging, but like say, this was a great experience, or so say something like I really enjoyed going to place X. It was, or I went to this place X. It was a great experience, right? Where there's a break between the sentences. So it seems like, is there a way to kind of consider certain sentences together, or do you think this challenge doesn't actually arise that much?
Yeah, I think there are a number of ways I could answer this. I think it's all right to play around with the length of each of these units, or the receptive fields. It could be at a character level, it could be at a word level, it could be at a sentence level. We could also have like a sliding window where you want sentence 1 and 2, then 2 and 3, then 3 and 4. So it's possible to play around with that, the receptive field, or what do each of these units mean. What gets challenging is that once we move into the territory of, let's say, a couple of sentences or paragraphs, representing them becomes a challenge. Like some of the errors that the model was making, I think was because the sentence representations could have been better. The other, and similarly in the other direction, there are challenges. So when I was, like, one of the caveats of this work is that it's as good as the data set is. What I mean by that is that if you could game this model, if you were to do this prediction at a word level, and let's say it's a sentiment task, positive, negative, and you add a comma to all of the negative sentiments, and you add a full stop to all of the positive sentiments, and now you're doing it at a word level, the model is basically going to latch onto this and predict the rationale as a comma for one and a dot for one. So this can happen, especially if the data set is biased. By moving to the sentence level, I kind of prevent it, because it's unlikely that biases would exist at sentence level. But this is a caveat that the information bottleneck is as good as the data set is, because it's going to latch onto the minimal statistics required to predict the label. But yeah, it's to answer your question in a nutshell, you can play around with the what each of these inputs sequences are.
Okay.
Yeah. So great. So thanks for the answer. So
Yeah.
so there's also a comment by Amarali in the chat, kind of pointing out some work at Facebook. But
I can't see the chat. Is there?
So I can read it out loud, or maybe,
It's about,
Oh yeah, now I can.
maybe Amir just wants to say it. So there's
Yeah, oh yeah, adversarial NLI. Yeah, adversarial NLI. I think, yeah, that's a great point. So adversarial NLI is very similar to the counterfactual work that I'm mentioning, where humans try to change the original input in ways that they play a game with the model. So they try to change the input to the extent where the model gets it wrong, even though the human can get it right. And yeah, this is still an outstanding problem that needs to be solved. Why models are still not robust to these kind of perturbations that humans can address.
I have a last question if anybody doesn't other has, because I ask a lot of questions. Do you think like this has application beyond NLP? Like, I think this idea is quite general, like the laws which you have can be applied to vision and other tasks also. And maybe they are already applied, I'm not aware. So have you look at like other works where they have been applied, other applications, other areas?
I think like even before this was introduced in NLP, it was first done in vision. So there have
Okay.
been works that have done this for MNIST and CIFAR and all these data sets. Recently, I've seen them being applied in like audio-visual or audio processing, signal processing, and the principle itself is heavily used in signal processing and information theory areas.
Okay. And last question, do you think any mathematical bounds we can give to this work? Like how much? Because like I think there should be good amount of mathematics behind also information theory. So can we basically bound something on the performance or on the rational something? Maybe I don't know. Like, have you looked at any theoretical work around this which could be linked with your work?
So it's the theory that I think is relevant is how tight is the bound. So, for instance, in going from in going from this basic objective to this like optimizable objective, there were some assumptions made, and it's possible to get that bound to be tighter. But that's more of a theory thing. Like in practice, I don't know if it's possible to say that with certain value of beta you'll be able to achieve a certain level of like compressibility and things like that. I think the only theory I'm aware of is how to get this like objective to be tighter and resemble the original objective more and more.
Okay, interesting. Anybody else has any other questions? Okay.
So great. So let's think. So Bhargavi. So one more time. So yeah. So thanks for giving the talk late in the night. So
No issues.
we appreciate it.
Yeah, it was a great talk. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
Hey, Dr. Phillips, a question.
Sure. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Are you